Manus AI launched in March of 2025, and I didn't talk about it very much. And the reason why is that it was another one of those cases like Devon, where the hype video ran way ahead of what people in practice were actually able to do. And so Reddit forums filled up and Twitter complaint conversations started. And the long and the short of it was that after launch in March through about June or July, there were a lot of issues with reliability, with cost, with token consumption clarity. That is starting to shift. It is shifting enough and the platform is stabilizing enough that I think it's worth having a wider conversation. But before we do that, I want to talk about what I think is actually one of the key challenges when we think and talk about AI and agents in particular, naming things. It is really hard to name an AI capability because AI is such a slippery technology. It's general purpose. It can do anything. And so naming and categorizing what these different things do becomes both really important to get work done and also not at all obvious. Like it's not clear. And so before we dive into the capabilities of Manus itself and kind of why I think the platform is stabilizing and use cases you can use, I want to take a second to talk about a proposed framework for how we assess agentic AI tools. As far as I know, we haven't really had a good framework for this. That's why I'm proposing one. I want to go through it. Tell me where it's wrong. Tell me where it's better. Let's dive in. I'm calling this the MACE Framework. MACE stands for Modality, Autonomy, Complexity, and Environment. I think those four things are all dimensions that we need to assess agentic AI tools on, and that we've really lacked the language for assessing them on previously. Let's dive into each of these. Number one, what is the primary modality of this tool? And there's at least 5 different things you can look at there. Text agents, examples of that would be Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini. They generate, they analyze text. Number 2, coding agents, Cursor, GitHub, Claude artifacts. Number 3, workflow agents, N8N, Zapier, Make, LangChain, etc. Number 4, research agents like Deep Research or Perplexity. And number 5, multimodal agents. Manus falls into that category. There are probably other primary modalities, but you get the idea, right? It's basically what is the primary mode of this agent becomes a relevant thing. Number 2A, autonomy. What is the degree of proactive autonomy that this agent brings to the table? It can be reactive, so it responds to individual prompts, again, like Claude or ChatGPT in the text window. It can be interactive, so it might be multi-turn with human guidance. You have that sometimes when deep research comes back and asks you a question. It can be semi-autonomous. So it might execute plans with checkpoints. And an example of that, GitHub Copilot Workspace, right? Like it will come back and ask you along the way. Or it could be completely autonomous, end-to-end execution, very minimal intervention, and Manus and Devon are both in that category. All right, what is the C in MACE? Complexity handling. It can handle simple tasks step by step. Some of the non-reasoning models with Claude and ChatGPT fall in this category. It can handle sequential multi-step. I would argue that Claude Code is a good example of sequential multi-step. It might handle branching, which is more complex. Good N8N workflows will do that. Or it might do dynamic replanning based on the results of what it sees. Manus does that, and more advanced agent configurations can do that as well. You can set up Claude with multiple agents to do that in Claude Code, for example. What is the E? Execution environment. Is it cloud contained, so it runs on the provider's sandbox? ChatGPT, Claude both do that in their application interfaces. Is it integrated into your IDE, so it works within the development environment inside Cursor, for example? Is it platform hosted with dedicated agent runtime? N8N can be that. It doesn't have to be that, depending on how you configure it. Is it infrastructure spanning? Can it deploy or access different external systems and use complex tools? Manus can do that. You can configure Claude Code to do that as well. And so when you look across this, it's easy for you to say, well, Nate, you just said a bunch of things, right? You said it needs to have complexity defined, execution environment defined, autonomy defined, the modality defined. That's all well and good. But what do we know about the current generation of AI agents and where they would fit? I want to suggest that we have at least 6 different categories. practical categories of AI agents out there today that sort of fit within this broader spectrum of use cases. The first one, it's the simplest, right? The conversational generators. ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini all come to mind. DeepSeek comes to mind. You use them when you need high quality text generation back, fundamentally. The second class is coding assistance, when you need to write code and you have a feedback loop for it. Depending on how you configure it, Claude Code is a great example here. Cursor does this, Windsurf does this, etc. You can't use these when you need sort of broader system orchestration unless you're going to configure them specially. And so I think that the exception to a lot of this is Claude Code because it's such a malleable tool. And so that's why it appears in a couple of these. But I think that Code Assistant is the good vanilla or generic use case for Claude Code. Third class of agent categories, workflow orchestrators. And Zapier, Make, all fall in here. So you're connecting known systems, you've got predictable data flows. You may have trouble with ambiguous inputs. These systems tend to be somewhat brittle. Number 4, research synthesizer agents. So deep research works here. Perplexity has a deep research function, and you can also use Claude in its deep research function. You put Opus 4.1 on there, you have it search the web and think hard. You need current information compiled, you need it analyzed, you need to act on findings or integrate them with systems. Typically, I find that the acting part is a problem with these, right? Like if you need to actually take an action rather than just read, don't use these. But if you just need to develop the information, it needs to be very high quality. Research synthesizers are really, really good, and people are using them for those use cases now. Number 5, autonomous execution agents. Manus and Devin obviously go in here, and there are custom agents that also work this way. There are people who are running Claude Code continuously, for example, and so it's been configured specially to be an autonomous execution agent. More and more energy is going into this category, number 5. That's part of why I've called out Manus, is because I think it is a flagship toward a wider future of autonomous AI execution, and it is worth paying attention to on that basis because the world is going to look more like Manus in the future. The challenge is managing the cost and managing the complexity. You have to know what kind of tasks you want to entrust to an agent that is that complex. The 6th category, hybrid collaboration. And so there are a lot of these where like you want it to come back and talk to you, you want it to engage with you. I would say Cursor Composer is a great example of this, where like there's some degree of human judgment, there's AI capability. I feel like Andre Karpathy has done a great job talking about that nuanced human collaboration piece that happens with good agent workflows. One of the things he emphasized in a tweet a few weeks ago is that as we build these AI agents, probably too much focus right now is going into bucket 5 with autonomous execution. And we are sometimes missing the realization that we need to have the smart time for the human to touch the model or for the human to touch the work, because humans can bring tremendous value, especially seasoned, experienced humans who have domain knowledge. And it is critical to give human space to do that well. All right. Those are 6 examples. You've got that MACE framework in your head. We've talked about how these different agents all bucket together. I hope you've gotten a better sense of the landscape. I think we need to have more of these conversations around how we bucket these intelligences. To me, one of the things that really needs to happen is that we need to have some degree of like tagging that goes with these names, because Claude Code is a great example. It doesn't just code. It does a lot more than code, but it was named Claude Code. Manus happens to write code. It also runs it. It also continues the workflow. Calling it a general purpose agent is fine, but it would be more precise to talk about it as a multi-agent orchestrator. I know that's a bit of a handful, but the precise wording helps us to name what agents to compare things to. Because otherwise we end up making inappropriate comparisons. I would not right now compare the agent mode that ChatGPT shipped with Manus. There are different architectures. They have different capabilities. I would say Manus is a whole lot better than the agent mode that ChatGPT shipped, and it's not close. And I'm not even sure they're playing in the same ballpark, even though they're both called agents. So if I were to think about this, the first thing I would do is I would say, how do we talk about the challenges associated with not only naming, which I think we've done the naming thing. We won't do any more on the naming. But the challenge is associated with stabilizing these technologies into reliable flavors that companies can go and access. Because part of why I am doing the work on naming and talking about naming, and part of why I've talked a lot about the whole ecosystem before getting into Manus specifically, is I think that organizations need some predictability to purchase. And delivering that predictability with a technology like AI is actually quite challenging. You have to solve complexity of orchestration, right? You have to solve state management across modalities. So if you have different subagents and you're trying to sell this as a bundle the way Manus is, you have to be able to show that each subagent can maintain its own state, but the orchestrator needs to be able to have global coherence because the enterprise will expect that. You have to be able to show that state complexity can continue to be maintained despite task length and modality extending. Another example is tool selection when it's uncertain. How can you show the enterprise what tool choice the agent will execute on when it's not sure what's going to happen? What does the fallback look like? What does the error handling look like? Memory management and context is another big piece that these kinds of companies, including Manus, have to solve effectively. How do you handle long workflows that accumulate huge, huge context? One of the biggest challenges in AI right now is that enterprise businesses bring enterprise scale context, and it's very, very difficult to bring that to AI in a way that's reliable and scalable. You can't just truncate, you might lose dependencies. You have to figure out how you handle external memory, how you handle summarization, and it's not entirely intuitive how to do that at enterprise scale. Another example of challenges that these kinds of agents need to solve: cross-modal context and how you avoid context bleed. So code outputs might need to inform text generation for a complex task, but you have to make sure that they have different context requirements and different token economics, so you're not spending code tokens on text tokens if code is more expensive, and so you're not leaking requirements back and forth between the two. Errors are another challenge. How do you avoid a situation where you go into an error loop when one subagent fails? That's a really hard challenge. What does an error recovery decision tree look like that an enterprise can audit and understand? Resource predictability is another big one. This has been one of the chief issues that people have complained about with Manus. How do you predict what it's going to cost if you're paying in credits? When a credit is burned, is it the same value for every action or not? People have complained that some days it seems like Manus burns more credits, and some days it seems like it burns less credits, and it's not predictable. Overall, it has gotten much better since March, and that's part of why I'm talking about it now, but it isn't at the degree of enterprise predictability that it needs to be yet. QA is another massive challenge. How do you validate code, and not just code, but engineering configurations when the LLM designs all of it with multi-agent orchestration? That's really hard to do. That is one of the reasons why Manus is more popular right now with consultants, more popular with independent builders than it is with enterprises. Last but not least, I want to talk a little bit about user intent and model coordination. It is really, really difficult to handle different model results consistently over time if you have different subagents working in the same way and some of them are from different models. That is not an easy and obvious task to do, but it's a task that many of these builders are trying to handle underneath the covers because of the unit economics associated with token burn for models. And so if there was an article, I think, from mentioned Notion, where it said basically 10 percentage points of Notion's margin have been eaten up in the last year just because Notion is using AI models. And so AI model makers are starting to eat SaaS margins. Well, if you want to combat that, you have to have a multi-agent configuration, but your multi-agent configuration needs to actually work. And that's really hard. And it gets harder when you think about the second part of what I said, user intent. How do you handle user intent when users are not intentful, when they aren't clear about what they want? And you have to assume at the enterprise level that on the one hand, you're going to have engineers that are really clear. And on the other hand, you're going to have people who just say, make it good. Good luck with that, right? Make a dashboard. Well, good luck with that. How do you interpret that? How do you interpret that for the enterprise in a way that is compliant with privacy, that is able to handle all of the challenges that come with building a fully fledged product in line with the user's presumed intent? How do you handle that with pushback and questions, et cetera? And everything I just described, which is all scaling challenges associated with agent orchestrators like Manus and why it makes them hard to scale to enterprise, I didn't even get to the technical scaling part, scaling out the actual system so it serves enterprise. That's another challenge. Why am I going over all the hard things? This all explains the challenge that Manus is trying to solve, why I believe it's important that we talk about it, and why I believe Manus's current position makes sense. At the end of the day, Manus is trying to get to a point where they can scale multi-agent orchestration for the enterprise. But to do that, they're running the classic startup playbook where they're starting with indie builders, they're starting with small startups, and then they're going to gain the experience they need to move into the enterprise space. They are trying to solve all of these problems in ways that are transparent to the user and in ways that enable the user to deliver value specifically where Manus is good. I'm going to talk about those use cases toward the end of this video. But Manus's current position is pretty simple. They've chosen to optimize for reliability, and they've chosen to optimize for capability. And that explains the issue with cost. The old engineering dilemma is you can't optimize for reliability, capability, and cost all at once. You got to pick 2 out of 3, right? You can be reliable and capable, but you're not going to be cheap. You can be reliable and cheap, but you're not going to be fast. You can't have all 3. And in a sense, I think Manus has one of the most transparent pricing systems in the business because when the tokens run out, you just buy more tokens and they can allocate the compute to the people who are willing to pay. They're also following a very typical platform evolution pattern. You have a demo phase that happened in March. You have early access, which happened sort of roughly April to June. People found edge cases. People had reliability issues right on schedule. They're now stabilizing. They've fixed a number of those problems. It's not perfect, but it's good enough to start talking about. And then going from there, they're going to be optimizing and scaling into the second half of this year. The fundamental tension that they are operating within is as follows. Users want ChatGPT simplicity. They want autonomous execution and they want predictable costs. They can't have it all. And what you're getting is complicated workflows. You are getting autonomous execution and you're getting variable costs. And this core explains why Manus remains in the expensive specialist tool category rather than a mainstream app. Because at the end of the day, solving for the engineering challenges that would enable ChatGPT simplicity and predictable costs and autonomous execution is non-trivial. Do you want to know an example of why it's non-trivial? Nobody else has launched a competitor that really matches Manus from one of the major model makers. The agent mode from ChatGPT doesn't do it. Claude Code is just in a separate category, I would argue. It's not the same thing. Google hasn't launched something. Manus is its own thing. Part of why is because the engineering challenges they're solving are really, really tough. And I've been through a few of those. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time talking about a framework. We talked about the MACE framework for intelligence and how you talk about agentic intelligence. We talked about some of the practical categories with agents, conversational generators, code assistants. We came all the way to autonomous executors, where I would argue Manus is. We talked a little bit about the challenge that comes from scaling intelligence for the enterprise and sort of where we are in this moment. I talked about state management. I talked about context and how you manage that, about error propagation, et cetera. All of this is top of mind, and I wanted to contextualize that because now you understand where Manus is, why Manus is optimizing for reliability and capability. Quality has been an issue with these agents, and they know that, and they know people won't come back as a challenger brand if they don't optimize for it. Where they are in their platform evolution, why they are really positioned as a specialist tool right now, but they are getting better, and why they've had trouble getting to the enterprise stage, but I think that they are poised to get there if they continue to optimize. All of that being said, in the present state, in September of 2025, what are practical use cases where Manus is likely to be useful today? I think there are several sweet spots where I've already seen people, I know people who are using Manus for this who are very happy. And I think that there's a pattern we can see that suggests how these tools tend to evolve that we can apply in other cases as well. Because remember, the whole purpose of this discussion, it's not just Manus. It's that we're trying to understand how Manus exemplifies where agentic tooling is going. So use case number 1, high-value research and analysis, a monthly, quarterly industry analysis for execs, competitive intelligence briefings, due diligence research packages, that kind of thing. It wins here. Manus wins because the cost is justifiable. If it costs $100 to develop that report, it's a lot cheaper than $2,000 for the consultant. It combines web research. You have to have a nicely formatted output. You have to analyze the data. And human review is expected anyway before you make strategic decisions, so it's not too risky. And the time savings can be huge. If it takes 2 hours to make that report, it saves you days and days of work. Use case number 2, content marketing production pipelines. So if you're managing multiple clients as a small agency, if you're a SaaS company with regular content needs, Manus can win here because they can scale content production without a linear cost increase. They can handle research, analysis, and creation and formatting of the content. The quality bar tends to be good first draft versus publication ready. And the ROI is really clear because otherwise you're hiring content writers. Use case number 3, data analysis and visualization for non-tech teams. So business analysts that don't have coding skills. Are there any of those left? Marketing teams analyzing campaign performance. Small businesses that just need ad hoc analysis. You kind of get the idea. Manus eliminates the need to learn Python, right? Or R, or hire a data scientist. It handles messy data, it handles the analysis, and it handles the visualization piece. I can think of other tools that do other parts of that, but I don't know of any tools that do all of those parts besides Manus. Output quality will often exceed Excel-based manual analysis, and time to insight is reduced. Now, with truly large enterprise data sets, this is not going to work, and I'm not going to pretend it will. And that's why I emphasize sort of the small business use case. Use case number 4, process documentation. So operations teams that document workflows, consultants that are analyzing client process, creating training materials. Manus wins because you can map existing processes and identify opportunities and create documentation on the fly, right? And it's very fast. It can save weeks of manual process scraping, and it can provide immediately actionable recommendations in a nice visualized format. Again, not a super risky use case. It saves a ton of time. Technical proof of concept development is the 5th one. So if you want to validate a product idea, if you want to explore a new integration, if you want to create technical specs as a PM, this goes beyond what you would get with a Lovable because Manus can create the prototype, the documentation, and the deployment in one big workflow. It can handle multiple technical domains. And at the end of the day, you want speed versus production-ready code. Overall, again, you see the same pattern. And I want to call out the success patterns here because I think that there's something to this that we should understand when we see where agents are at in the fall of 2025. One, there needs to be economic justification. All of the tasks that I've described are $500 to $5,000 if done manually, often in the thousands. The Manus cost is going to be a fraction of that, a tenth of that or less. The time savings stretches like into days typically. And the quality expectation tends to be make a fantastic first draft, not a perfect final product. Those are the sweet spot for independent agents in the fall of 2025. Especially if you notice, because these are technical, complex workflows. They have 5 to 15 to 20 to 25 distinct actions. They're combining research with creation with formatting. They have human review and refinement, and they have very clear deliverables. Now, I think the thing to call out is that if you have an agent that excels at complex multi-domain workflows where the alternative is hiring expensive specialists, what you have is still a premium automation tool rather than a general productivity app. We keep coming back to this idea that there are certain buckets in the agentic landscape that are more specialized than others and where you're going to be paying more as a result. And one of the things I want you to take away from this is that AI agents should not be viewed as a singular bucket anymore. You have agents that are going to be positioned as general productivity tools, and you have agents that are going to be positioned as specialist tools for specialist tasks. Manus, as it stabilizes, is looking more and more like a specialist tool for a specialist task. It's looking like a surgeon's scalpel versus a Swiss Army knife. I'm sure they would like to be a Swiss Army knife from an economics perspective, but because of the engineering challenges I've identified earlier in this video, it's a really hard position for a multi-agent orchestrator to be in. That being said, I want to end my video by talking about it because I think that is where the market is going, and that is why it's worth talking about Manus. Manus is like the canary in the coal mine. They're the ones that are showing us the way forward on multi-agent orchestration, what it looks like independently. They've shown how you can start to stabilize a product even for smaller businesses and independent builders, or for teams on larger businesses that don't have too heavy a data needs. But they don't have the scale that the major model makers have, and they haven't been able to build out the kind of footprint that would enable them to really harvest unit economic gains and bring down the cost curve. And that's where I think we're going. I think it is likely that we will see a version of Manus from a major model maker in the next few months, maybe from Google, maybe from Claude, maybe from OpenAI. But the value that people see with these complex use cases is very high. If you were spending $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on this, yeah, you're going to be willing to pay for the whatever it costs to get this done with an AI agent because it's so much cheaper. It's a fifth of the price. It's going to be so much cheaper. Which, if you are looking as a major model maker to recover some of the costs associated with these models, you want to have more reasons for people to pay you $200. Maybe this is, the reason why you have a $200 ad hoc task on top of your $200 subscription. And some people will pay for that because it's so good. And you're going to see a lot more of the economists at these major model makers, and yes, they have economists, looking for these kinds of specialist tasks that enable them to scale margin. And that's where Manus is showing the way. So if you have specialized tasks, if you have stuff that I have talked about where it's, $500 to $5,000 task, and you know that you need to get that task done no matter what, maybe try Manus. It will probably save you a fair bit of money, and you will be willing to pay the cost because it's so much cheaper and the ROI is so clear, especially if you're looking for an excellent first draft. So that's my verdict on Manus. I waited to talk about it till it started to stabilize. I feel excited to talk about it now. I think it's a great example of how AI agents are developing specialized use cases in fall 2025, and I'm excited to see where Manus goes next. Cheers.